Okay, welcome to our unit or introduction to unit design using the UBD format and engaging students with big ideas. The best way to use this tutorial is to go to the instructional design templates folder at the top of our Moodle course page and open up the Word file for the unit plan template, because as we go along with this you'll have opportunities to stop the tutorial and add ideas to your first draft unit plan. So one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is the concept of hooks, hooking students. Something years ago we used to call anticipatory sets. These are ways that you introduce a lesson in a very engaging way to get students excited about content. And I just want to start off sharing with you one of the best hooks that I've seen that sticks in my mind, a real kinesthetic hook that really enabled students to use movement and their visual spatial intelligence to really connect to concepts in economics. And what the teacher did in this situation is the teacher called up a student to the front of the class. There was a table with a box of paper, plain white paper, and next to it was a stapler. And the teacher told the student that they were going to be producing widgets, and that a widget was one piece of paper folded in half with one staple through it. And the student got, I think it was 10 seconds to create as many widgets as they could. Teacher timed it, and they did. When it was done, the teacher graphed on the board how many workers, one, and how many widgets produced. So let's say they produced 6 widgets in that 10-second time span. Then they asked the second student to come up, and they did the same thing. Again, graphing the number of workers, now 2, and the number of widgets produced. And they kept doing this until the number of widgets went down, each time graphing them on the board. And obviously, the concept that the teacher is introducing here is the point of diminishing returns. It was a phenomenal way to get students postured for learning and to get them hooked and interested in the topic of economics, and specifically the point of diminishing returns. And these are the kinds of hook activities we're going to talk about tonight, in addition to the topic of unit planning. Okay, welcome. So our agenda for this week is going to be to start your first UBD style unit plan. This is a very complex and technical aspect of teaching, so please have patience. You're not going to go through this and create a perfect UBD unit plan. I've worked with teachers who've been teaching for 10, 20 years that are still trying to create the perfect UBD unit plan. So tonight is about getting a start and about getting familiar with the terms and the components of a good UBD plan, as well as looking at some exemplars. You'll notice that there is an exemplar folder at the top of our course Moodle page where you'll see sample units in both math and science. I think you should have those open and review those as we go through this to really kind of hammer in some of the concepts we'll talk about. In addition to drafting your first start of a unit plan, not a complete unit plan, we'll also finish up talking about some more strategies to engage students with really good hooks at the start of classes. So as we said last week, UBD is nothing new. It's an industry standard, one that's been around for some time now, since the early 1990s. Two things I think make UBD unique, and one we already started introducing last week, and that's the concept of backward design, the concept of starting with your desired results with students, the behaviors you want them to be able to exhibit, starting with clarifying that before you start planning out learning activities and assessments and other things. The next thing I think that really makes this unique and is kind of new is the concept of transfer and the concept of understanding. UBD is really built around the idea that students haven't learned something until they can transfer it to a whole different unique situation and apply it. And that really only comes with a very deep understanding of content. And it's really at the foundation of any good UBD unit. All right, the activity we're going to do now, two things I just want to make note of on the course page. One is I'm going to be asking you to create some things, and you're going to be using a post called Understanding and Transfer to document the results and your ideas that you come up with here. Also, you'll notice on our course page for this week, You'll see two UBD videos, UBD Video 1 and UBD Video 2. If you feel that you need them, they're going to go into a lot more depth. Same concepts we're going to talk about here, but just in a lot more detail. So please take the time to view those if you feel it'll be beneficial. So what I want you to do in the first part of this activity is just pick a course that you think you may teach. This could be something you're doing in you're observing in your field experience, or a course that you hope to teach one day. And I want you to draft a one-sentence mission statement for that course. Really think about what you as a math teacher or a biology teacher or a chemistry teacher, what is your mission in teaching that course? And really take some time to think about this and make sure that it's clear, but also it's deep enough to really reflect a true mission statement. So now hopefully you have a mission statement, and it's one that you're happy with and one that you're very passionate about. An example of a mission statement of a math teacher excuse me, might be to provide students with the passion and tools to quantify the world around them. That's a mission of a really good math teacher. So I want you to take a look at the mission statement that you've written in front of you, and really make sure you understand what your mission is. And then I want you to reflect, and again, using that same post, I want you to write a little short piece on what you would have students do either throughout this course or at the end of this course to prove to you that they've reached that mark. So in my example, if my mission as a math teacher was to provide students with the tools to quantify the world around them, at some point I would have to have students actually apply math to do just that. And those are the kind of things that I want you to try to come up with. And then I want you to reflect on how that would shape your approach to assessment throughout your course. Again, you'll be responding to questions on that same post. So this would be a good time to open your unit plan template that you would find in the Instructional Design Templates folder at the top of our course page. And just notice that the template is broken down into three basic parts. Stage 1, which is about identifying desired results. Stage 2, which is about assessment, and we talked about taking a judicious approach to assessment and really trying to create an assessment system that enables you as a teacher to collect as much evidence as possible, as many artifacts to show that students really truly have the deep understanding of your content that you're looking for. And this is where that transfer comes in. So right off the bat, you know that part of your assessment is going to require students to apply this content to a whole new situation. And last, the third section of the plan is about learning activities, what you're going to do with students on a day-to-day basis to get to these points. So the first part of your unit plan that we're going to complete is nothing new. It's kind of review. We've been talking about this for the past couple weeks. Is you're going to start with your state standards. If you're a math teacher, it's going to be the Common Core Mathematics. If you're a science teacher, it's going to be the Next Gen Science Standards. And once you know your course and you identify the standards that you're going to teach in this particular unit, that'll be a big step towards completing stage 1 of your UBD unit plan. As we said before, when you're at this stage and you're trying to identify the standards that you're going to cover in this particular unit, there's a couple different resources at your disposal. One obviously would be your district curriculum. Your district curriculum should, if it's a quality curriculum, should break down the standards by unit for you and explain to you in this unit you're going to be working towards these standards. But if that's not the case, as we said, district to district, the quality of curriculum varies. You can go on the New Jersey State Model Curriculum site, and for your subject and grade level, it will suggest how to break down standards by unit. In addition, obviously, you can go to the Common Core standards page or the Next Gen standards page, which we spent time on in the weeks leading up to this tutorial, and pick out standards that you think make sense in terms of how they go together well. Now you should have your standards identified, and you'll notice at the top of stage 1 of the UBD unit plan template, there's a space to put your standards, and you're simply going to cut and paste the standards, whether it's the next gen standards or Common Core math standards that this unit will revolve around, just cut and paste them in that first box. Another strategy that we've been talking about is the concept of unpacking. And that's when you take a look at your state standards and you think that they are too broad, or depending upon your student profile, maybe need to be broken down further in order to get them to the point where you can build a daily lesson plan around them. So if you feel like unpacking is necessary, just a quick review of that process, and you'll see a sample here of one of the reading standards. A good place to start is circling the nouns and the verbs to help you kind of extract and unpack the skills as well as the content that are required in this standard. That's a good first step to help you break this down further into smaller chunks. So in this same example, after going through that breakdown and trying to think about what I could get accomplished in one lesson, in this example I'm going to be, let's say, a business teacher, and try to shape that into a clear learning objective complete with criteria, I would go from the standard that you just saw on the previous slide, which was a reading on informational text standard, to an objective like, given a paragraph to write, the student will be able to articulate the purpose of a business letter. So at this point, the standard, I think, is in a condition where I could actually design a daily lesson plan around it, whereas previously I felt it was too broad. So as we move through this tutorial, I'll also, in addition to the exemplars, we talked about the exemplar folder at the top of the course page, but I'll also walk you through an example of a science lesson through each stage of this. So far we've been talking about standards. So for my example of this unit, I'm going to pick this next gen science standard, a life science standard. Design, evaluate, and refine a solution for reducing the impacts of human activities on the environment and biodiversity. So moving forward, I'm going to be working from this standard as I walk you through each phase of the unit planning process. So now it's your turn. Open up your unit plan template, and so far we've talked about 2 sections of stage 1 that you should be able to complete right now. And again, complete's the wrong word. You're just trying to get a start. Just jot some ideas down, and then after this tutorial, after we've had time to talk and reflect and get some feedback, you can go back and finish this off for your first draft unit plan, which I think the assignment is due in the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. So far we've talked about standards, this top portion of the stage 1 right here. So that's something you should be able to cut and paste right in. And we've also talked about the unpacking process. So if your standards need to be unpacked, you're going to go through that exercise and break these standards down. And under knowledge and skills down here, you're going to write your learning objectives. Now, frequently with math and science teachers, don't be surprised if these 2 boxes look a lot alike. Because if you don't require a lot of unpacking, then you're basically going to be cutting and pasting your standards from the standard section into this lower right hand section, knowledge and skills. One of the most critical ways to engage students is through essential questions, which is another part of stage 1 of a UBD unit plan. And I think, since we're also talking about hook activities and engaging students tonight, I think essential questions is really critical. These are basically focus questions that you can frame out that can serve as a window for your students into your particular content and your unit understandings. These questions tend to be thought-provoking. They tend to build a bridge between your content and the students' interests. They're not yes and no questions. They're not simple questions. They're questions that really provoke critical thinking and inquiry. But they also have to really have a strong connection to the conceptual foundations of your content. This is where it gets so tricky. Great teachers have the ability to come up with essential questions that are not only really engaging and provoking to students, but also have a clear bridge to the content that they're going to teach. So very, very challenging part of the unit planning process. So let's take a look at some sample good essential questions in math and science. And after I just define essential questions, hopefully you'll see how these samples really fit the bill. You'll see how they are open-ended. A lot of them are questions that may not even have a real answer. It's just a matter of students having the tools and the content to make good structured arguments for how they feel about these particular questions. But hopefully when you look at these samples, you'll find ones that you like, you'll find ones that you identify with, and ones that you think, hey, I could design a question like that. And hopefully you'll see how these questions could both be engaging to students and could build a bridge to actual units in a math or science curriculum. Sometimes the best way to teach a complex topic like essential questions is to not only give you samples of what good essential questions look like, but show you what they're not. All right, so let's take a look at some sample questions that you might see out there that really are not essential questions, and then we'll fix them to make them essential questions. So here's a music teacher that, for an essential question, what are the notes of the C major scale? That's not an essential question. It's a content question, but it's not an open-ended, thought-provoking question. The one below it, what distinguished music from noise, would be an example of an essential question in a music class. What types of foods are in the food groups? Again, not an essential question. It has a very definite, clear answer. It's a decent content question. It's a building block kind of question. But the question below it, what should we eat, is more of an essential question. Who was B.F. Skinner? That's a classic kind of definition, name kind of thing. Not an essential question, but tweaking it a bit, why do people behave as they do? That would be an example of an essential question in that same class. If you're still struggling with coming up with essential questions for your unit, this is a really short exercise that you can do to help you out with that. Look at your knowledge, the knowledge and skills section of your unit, and pick out a particular piece of content. Insert that content into the blanks of these three questions. Why study whatever it is? So let's say you're pulling out the Pythagorean theorem, okay, out of your knowledge and skills section. So why study the Pythagorean theorem? So what? What couldn't we do if we didn't understand the Pythagorean theorem? And how is the Pythagorean theorem used in the real world? Then answer these three questions on your own. That usually gets you a good step closer to coming up with some good essential questions. You should know that the answers to your essential questions will start to get you one step closer to another phase of stage one, which we're going to talk about, and that's the enduring understandings that you're shooting for. So going back to my example of the unit that I'm creating here as we go along, if you remember, I was creating the unit, the life science unit, on how students impact, or how students can reduce the impact that they have on the world around them and biodiversity. So here are three examples of what I think are good essential questions for my sample unit here. Why is it important for us to be promoting sustainability throughout the world? How are current practices or habits impacting the environment? What life or societal changes are needed to make improvements and promote sustainability? These are questions that I not only think I could really connect to the content I want to teach in terms of ecosystems and biodiversity, but also ones that I think my students will be very passionate and interested in solving. All right, it's your turn now to go back to your unit design template and focus down here on your essential questions and try to put together, I would say, anywhere from 2 to 3 good essential questions. Again, starting looking at your knowledge and skills, and if you need to, putting them into that kind of fill in the blanks exercise we did to come up with some good essential questions. So the last part of stage one of your unit plan is going to be what we call enduring understandings. And this is difficult sometimes for new teachers to come to terms with, but when you really sit back and think about it, it's important to realize that your students will forget the vast majority of content and skills that you teach them. If you think back to classes you had in high school, even ones with really good teachers, the bulk of the information is gone. So enduring understandings are what we hope is left. These are the big ideas, the most critical things that you want students to come away with, and usually they really connect. You really have to go back to your mission statement, because your mission statement usually connects to these kinds of understandings that are bigger ideas that you hope students keep. And a great way to start with this is, what is it about this unit that you'd like them to remember 5 years from now? If you have a hard time coming up with that, sometimes answering your essential questions is a great way to come up with good enduring understandings, because there should be a real good alignment between those things. I'm going to show you some examples. So here are two examples of enduring understandings from my life science unit that I'm building here as we go along. Again, a lot of the terminology and vocabulary that I have students memorize for this unit I know is going to be gone. But 5 years from now, I hope they understand that when they buy a styrofoam cup and they throw that out, it's not the end of the story. I want them to walk away understanding that a product's life cycle continues far beyond when you run out of use for it. And I also hope they understand just how fragile ecosystems are, and the relationship between our consumption and the viability of those ecosystems. So these are examples of things that I think years from now, when they think about my class, I hope they remember these understandings. Okay, now it's your turn, and you can go to your design template, and right here in the lower middle section of stage 1, you can start to frame out a start, maybe 1 or 2 of your enduring understandings. If you're struggling, again, another great way to come up with your understandings is to go down back here to your essential questions and answer them. And a lot of times that will help you come up with those pieces. So now it's time for stage 2, assessment. And if you look, you'll notice that stage 2 is divided into 4 sections, and that's intentional to really emphasize to you that good unit assessment is not a one-shot deal. It's not a test at the end. It's a system that has a lot of different components. The components really should give you a very comprehensive portrait of student learning, and there should be something for every kind of student. Not every student is a great test taker, so there should be multiple assessment approaches, whether they're traditional kind of multiple choice select response testing, or open-ended essay testing, or what we call more authentic assessment that results in student product or performance, and that those products or performances are actually reviewed by the teacher as learning artifacts of the content and skills and the enduring understandings that the unit is designed around. So I don't want to use a buzzword like authentic assessment without taking some time to explain it. And this is a concept that we will come back to throughout the course. But an authentic assessment is as close to real life assessment as possible. In other words, when our students leave us and enter careers, for the most part, they're not going to be taking multiple choice exams. They're going to be evaluated based on their performance or the products that they design or create. So you're trying to mimic that. And these authentic assessments usually require students to demonstrate a specific behavior or skill. They're usually open-ended, multifaceted. Frequently, those different facets can connect to other subjects in order to create a truly interdisciplinary assessment. And these assessments are guided by very well communicated expectations and criteria that get put into what we call a scoring rubric. And later on in the class, we'll talk about how to build rubrics around a performance assessment. So these are some examples of the kinds of authentic assessments that we're talking about from my sample life science unit. And again, the unit is about helping students see the impact between their behavior and ecosystems and biodiversity. When you take a look at these sample authentic assessments, you'll notice that they do have a closer correlation to what students will do in their careers and the way students will be evaluated in their careers. You'll see that there's something for everybody. Some are more artistic and creative. Some are more quantitative. But I think in addition to them being open-ended and authentic, hopefully when you look at these three examples, you'll see a strong content connection between these assessments and my standard. Okay, so now it is your turn to just start, again, not finish, start your assessment system. So where I would start, I guess, would be right in this top left-hand corner with your performance task. All right, and these are your authentic assessments. Maybe just try to frame out one and take a look at the exemplar math and science units to get some more ideas, as well as reflect on the examples that I just gave you here in this tutorial. Again, these are authentic things, student products, student performances that are both exciting and also connect to your content. And then the next thing I would do is move over here to this section. Once you have a clear idea of what one of your performance assessments or authentic assessments will be, think about the criteria that you're going to use to evaluate them and jot them down in this box up here in the top right-hand corner. Then from there, I would move down to this bottom, which is kind of like a catch-all, right? Where in addition to these performance assessments, you're also probably going to have quizzes, maybe a homework grade, some exit tickets, or other things. Not everything has to be graded, so even things like non-graded exit tickets, you might want to jot some notes down in this bottom section here. And last but not least, I listed it as optional because not every teacher does it, but you might also want to think about self-assessment, ways that you can have students assess their own learning, whether it's through a survey or some kind of visual activity. I've seen teachers give students 3 traffic lights, a green light, which means they have a very deep understanding of what you're talking about, a red light, which means they're really struggling and need help, and a yellow light, meaning they're somewhere in the middle. So that's an example of a student taking some time to assess their own learning. So now it's your turn to start to frame out your assessment system. If you turn to stage 3, the last section of your unit plan template, you'll see the learning activities, and you'll frame them out day by day. This slide just gives you some of the things to keep in mind when you're designing learning activities. But for the most part, your activities, you'll see the first thing I ask you is kind of what learning objective from your knowledge and skills section is this particular day focusing on. And then I ask you to kind of walk us through very quickly what student tasks, what students will be doing, maybe a little bit on some of the resources that they'll be using to do it. And then you'll see the last thing is explaining how you're going to assess that particular learning objective for that particular day. So that really makes up each of your learning activities. And again, use the exemplars to get a feel for what we're talking about here. I think unfortunately when we think about math and science, we reflect back solely on our own experience in high school. And even the teachers that we enjoyed in high school frequently were solely chalk and talk teachers. And not that there's not a time and place for chalk and talk, but when you're taking time to create a great unit plan, you really want to think about alternatives. And I think this slide for a statistics class shows the kinds of activities that you can do in a STEM class that go beyond just chalk and talk and really require students to do the thinking, and the teacher is kind of the guide on the side. So ideally these are the kind of activities that hopefully you're shooting for. Alright, now it's your turn to start to hash out your learning activities. And as you'll see in this snapshot here, you see the activities are organized lesson by lesson, and that's the way you should organize yours. And like we said, you're really, when you think about an activity, you're thinking about 3 main things, right? First starting off, what learning objective is this activity built around? And then I'm going to jump down here to talk about what assessments I'm going to use in this activity, whether it's formal, informal, graded or not, what kind of assessments I'm going to use to evaluate whether or not students have actually achieved this objective up here. And then I'm going to finally describe the student tasks and what students will actually be going through, what resources they'll be using to actually complete this learning experience. Once you complete this draft start of a unit plan, I would like you to email it to me for some initial feedback. Again, I understand you will not be emailing me a completed unit plan. You'll have a unit plan with basically some ideas in each of the sections that we've talked about here. But it's a good early stage for me to look at your thought process and give you some feedback and some direction so that you don't waste time moving forward as you move towards completing your first unit plan, which you'll be turning in a couple weeks. So go through these sections, clean it up a little bit, and email it to me for feedback. So now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about engaging students, kind of go full circle. We started out talking about that hook activity with the point of diminishing returns, and I want to close with engaging students, or something author Dave Burgess calls the third circle. He uses in his book, which it's one of those books I don't require in class, but if you feel like engaging students may be an issue for you, or if you just want additional strategies to do that, I strongly suggest picking a copy up. It's an easy read and not that long. But I think he brings a real zeal to this topic that you don't see out there that much. And he basically talks about a barbecue. He says, if you were to come to a barbecue at his house, and let's say he bought outstanding meat, all right, he bought the best filet mignon, right, and you came to his house, and on the plate he just put the raw piece of filet mignon, what would your reaction be? And explains how you wouldn't want it, it wouldn't be palatable, you probably couldn't get it down. Well, he says that meat is your content, and that great teachers don't serve raw meat. Great teachers take time to season, to tenderize, and to really shape that content before presenting it to students. And that's really what he calls the third circle in its presentation, where not only do you need great content knowledge and not only do you need great teaching methods, but you do need some degree of showmanship. And we're not all master showmen, but it is an aspect of teaching that we do need to try to work on. So one great hook that I've already seen some of you talk about is the whole movement piece, or we call kinesthetic teaching. I think I've replied to somebody's journal where I talked about math teachers that use the Nerf hoop shot, where a student, a volunteer who comes up to the board and solves a problem, if they get it correct, they have the chance to shoot one Nerf basket. If they get it in, they get some kind of trivial prize. It's a great way to get kids moving and get kids more motivated to come to the board. I've seen teachers also turn their classroom into an opinion poll. So they might present class with a problem, and they might say, okay, everybody who believes we should solve the problem this way, go to that corner of the room. And if you believe we should solve the problem another way, go to this corner of the room. And then they actually pick on students and say, why did you go to the space you went to, and have them explain it. Great way to get them moving, great way to get them thinking, and great way to get them explaining their thought process. Another common hook that I've seen teachers use is something Burgess calls the Picasso hook, and that's just basically how can you incorporate the visual arts into your lesson. Now, this is the kind of thing that you have to be careful with, because obviously you're not trying to turn your chemistry class into an arts and crafts experience, right? But anytime that you can have opportunities for students to express concepts in a graphic organizer or some kind of 3D model. In a chemistry class, obviously students using atomic models or organizing data in a graphic organizer or flowchart. These are great ways to use, students I think are more visual now than they've ever been. And I think it is important for us as teachers to try to think about how we can bring more of the visual arts into our teaching, again, while keeping our content in the foreground, but it's another great way to hook students. Finally, I think one of the most complex hooks to pull off, again, when I say pull off, I mean it's not only does it have to be engaging to students, but it has to really help reinforce your content, is something that Dave Burgess calls the mystery bag hook, where he gets students engaged by hiding something from them and asking them to hypothesize what's in the bag or what's in the box. And then after they find out what's in it, reflecting on their original thoughts and how it compares to the reality. Well, I'm actually going to walk you through a science lesson very similar to this called the black box lesson. It's a way to teach atomic structure. We'll do that in a week or two, and hopefully that'll kind of clarify. But if you can work into a lesson the act of hiding something and getting students to kind of guess, you'd be surprised at how engaged it makes students. Okay, so now hopefully you have some more tools to hook and engage students. Also, you have your first start draft of a unit plan that you'll email to me for feedback, and we'll keep building from there.